Sarah Martinez walked into Henderson's gun shop on a humid Tuesday morning, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete floor. The bell above the door chimed softly, but the three men behind the counter barely glanced up from their conversation about weekend hunting plans. She adjusted her backpack straps and approached the display case, her eyes scanning the array of firearms with practiced precision. "Can I help you find something, miss?" The clerk's tone carried that particular brand of condescension she'd grown accustomed to over the years. His name tag read Chuck, and his beer belly strained against a camouflage t-shirt. Behind him, two other employees exchanged knowing smirks. "I'm looking for a Remington 700 with a good scope setup," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Something accurate at long range." Chuck's eyebrows shot up and he let out a short laugh. "Honey, that's a serious rifle. You sure you wouldn't be more comfortable with something smaller? Maybe a nice little .22 for target practice?" The other employees joined in with barely suppressed chuckles. "Yeah," added the younger one, wiping grease from his hands with a dirty rag. "Those 700s have quite a kick. Might knock you right over." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She'd heard variations of this conversation countless times before. "I can handle the recoil just fine. Could you show me what you have in stock?" "Look, sweetheart," Chuck leaned against the counter, his patronizing smile widening. "I've been selling guns for 15 years. Trust me when I say that rifle isn't for you. How about we start with something more appropriate?" The bell chimed again as another customer entered, but Sarah kept her focus on Chuck. "What exactly makes you think I can't handle a 700? Have you seen me shoot?" "Don't need to," Chuck replied with a dismissive wave. "I can tell just by looking. That's a man's gun, and unless your boyfriend sent you in here to pick it up for him, you're wasting both our time." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but before she could respond, a calm voice cut through the tension from behind her. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Is there a problem here?" The entire atmosphere in the shop shifted instantly. Chuck straightened up so fast he nearly knocked over a display of ammunition boxes. The other employees suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting to look at. "No, sir, General Morrison, sir." "No problem at all," Chuck stammered, his face draining of color. "Just helping this young lady find something suitable." Sarah turned to see a distinguished man in his 60s wearing a simple polo shirt and khakis. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture spoke of decades of military bearing. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Sharp, intelligent, and currently fixed on Chuck with obvious disapproval. "I see," General Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "And what exactly did you determine was suitable for her?" Chuck swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Well, sir, we were just discussing maybe a smaller caliber rifle. Something more manageable." "Manageable for whom?" The general's question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah watched this exchange with growing curiosity. She'd never seen grown men transform so quickly from arrogant to apologetic. The general hadn't raised his voice or made any threats, yet the entire dynamic in the shop had changed completely. "Sir, if I may," Sarah interjected, finding her voice again. "I originally asked to see a Remington 700 with a scope setup. I'm quite familiar with the platform." General Morrison turned to her with interest, his stern expression softening slightly. "Are you now? And what's your experience with that particular rifle?" "I've been shooting since I was 12, Sarah replied, grateful to finally have someone take her seriously. "My father taught me on his old hunting rifle, and I've competed in several precision shooting competitions over the past few years." "Competitions?" The general's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. "What kind of distances are we talking about?" "Mostly 600 to 1,000 yards. My personal best was a 5-shot group at 800 yards that measured just under 4 inches. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she spoke. These were facts, measurable achievements that couldn't be dismissed or patronized away. General Morrison nodded approvingly. "Impressive. And what scope magnification do you prefer for that kind of precision work?" "Depends on conditions, but usually something in the 10 to 24 power range. Variable magnification gives you flexibility for different scenarios." Chuck and his colleagues stood frozen behind the counter, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. They'd clearly never expected their casual dismissal of this young woman to be challenged by someone of the general's obvious authority. "Gentlemen," General Morrison said, turning back to the employees, "I believe this young lady knows exactly what she's looking for. Perhaps you could show her your selection of Remington 700s with appropriate optics. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Chuck practically fell over himself reaching for keys to unlock the rifle cabinet. We have several models available, including a few with premium scope packages. Sarah suppressed a smile as she watched the complete transformation. The same rifles that had been too much gun for her moments ago were suddenly being presented with detailed specifications and enthusiastic recommendations. As Chuck fumbled with the rifle cabinet, clearly nervous under the general's watchful gaze, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about this mysterious man who had appeared at exactly the right moment. His presence had shifted the entire situation, and she found herself curious about his story. The general caught her looking and offered a slight smile. Sometimes people need a reminder about making assumptions, he said quietly. Shall we see what they have to offer? Chuck's hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the rifle cabinet. His earlier bravado completely dissolved. He carefully lifted out a beautiful Remington 700 with a polished walnut stock, mounting it on the counter display rack with exaggerated care. This is our top-of-the-line model, he said, his voice now respectful and professional. Comes with a Leupold VX5 HD scope 315x44, pre-zeroed at the factory and guaranteed sub-MOA accuracy. Sarah picked up the rifle, feeling its familiar weight and balance. She worked the bolt smoothly, checking the action and trigger pull with practiced movements. The general watched her handling of the firearm with obvious approval. The trigger breaks clean at about 3 pounds, she observed, lowering the rifle and examining the scope mounts. Good glass solid mounting system. What kind of groups have you seen with this particular rifle? Chuck looked confused, clearly not expecting such technical questions. Well, the manufacturer claims sub-MOA, like I said. That's what they claim, Sarah replied patiently. But what have you actually tested? Different rifles perform differently even within the same model line. Have you taken this one to the range? The younger employee, emboldened by his boss's newfound cooperation, stepped forward. Actually, we don't typically test every rifle. Most customers just trust the specifications. General Morrison cleared his throat softly. That's interesting. In my experience, the difference between claimed performance and actual performance can be quite significant. Wouldn't you agree, miss? Martinez. Sarah Martinez. She extended her hand, which the general shook with a firm grip. And yes, absolutely. I never buy a rifle without seeing how it actually performs. Paper specifications only tell part of the story. Smart approach, the general nodded. I'm Robert Morrison, by the way. Retired Army. And I have to say your attention to detail is refreshing. Chuck wiped sweat from his brow, clearly struggling to keep up with the conversation. Well, we do have a satisfaction guarantee. If the rifle doesn't perform to your expectations, you can return it within 30 days. Sarah set the rifle down and fixed Chuck with a steady gaze. That's assuming you'd take my word about its performance. 20 minutes ago you didn't think I could handle the recoil, let alone evaluate accuracy. The shop fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Chuck's face flushed red as the implications of Sarah's words sank in. His earlier dismissiveness had been so automatic, so ingrained, that he hadn't even realized how contradictory his current helpfulness appeared. General Morrison stepped closer to the counter. You know, Chuck, I'm curious about something. What qualifications do you use to determine whether someone is capable of handling a particular firearm, sir? Chuck looked like he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. It's a simple question. When Miss Martinez walked in here asking about a precision rifle, what criteria did you apply to conclude she couldn't handle it? The silence stretched uncomfortably. The other employees found various tasks that required their immediate attention, leaving Chuck to face the general's question alone. Well, sir, it's just that most women prefer smaller calibers, Chuck finally mumbled. Most women, the general repeated slowly. Based on what data? Have you surveyed the female customers who come into your shop? Tracked their preferences and performance statistics? No, sir, I just meant... Chuck's voice trailed off as he realized how weak his reasoning sounded when actually examined. Sarah watched this interaction with fascination. The general wasn't being aggressive or confrontational, but his methodical questioning was exposing the complete lack of logic behind Chuck's assumptions. It was like watching a masterclass in how to dismantle prejudice through simple, direct inquiry. Let me share something with you, General Morrison continued, his tone conversational but carrying undeniable authority. Some of the finest marksmen I've worked with over my 30-year career have been women. Steady hands, excellent concentration, superior attention to detail. Assuming someone's capabilities based on their gender isn't just poor customer service, it's poor business. Chuck nodded vigorously, though Sarah suspected he was agreeing more out of fear than understanding. Yes, sir, absolutely, sir. You're completely right. Furthermore, the general continued, dismissing a customer who clearly knows what they're talking about is a good way to lose sales too. Competitors who actually listen to their customers. Sarah decided to test just how much Chuck's attitude had actually changed. Speaking of competitors, what can you tell me about the new Bergara rifles? I heard they're giving Remington some serious competition in the precision market. Chuck's eyes widened slightly. This was obviously not a question he'd expected from someone he'd initially tried to steer toward a beginner's rifle. He glanced nervously at General Morrison before answering. The Bergaras they're good rifles. Very accurate. Some people say they're even better than the Remingtons for precision work. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, no longer confident in his expertise. Interesting, Sarah mused. Do you stock any Bergara models with similar scope packages? We have one in the back. B14 HMR and 6.5 Creedmoor. It's been sitting there for a while because honestly, not many people ask about precision rifles like that. General Morrison raised an eyebrow. Not many people or not many people you think would be interested in precision rifles? The distinction hit its mark. Chuck's assumption had been that his customer base didn't include serious precision shooters, when the reality was that he'd been steering potential customers away from higher-end products based on his own biases. Could you bring out the Bergara? Sarah asked. I'd like to compare the two side by side. As Chuck hurried toward the back room, clearly eager to demonstrate his newfound helpfulness, General Morrison turned to Sarah with a slight smile. You know, I have a feeling this is going to be a very educational experience for everyone involved. Chuck returned carrying the Bergara rifle like it was made of spun glass, setting it carefully next to the Remington. The contrast between the two rifles was immediately apparent. While both were quality firearms, the Bergara had a more modern tactical appearance with its adjustable stock and threaded barrel. Sarah picked up the Bergara, immediately noting the different feel and balance. This is the HMR model. What scope does it come with? Vortex Viper PST Gen 2 525x50, Chuck replied, his voice now carrying genuine enthusiasm. Variable magnification, first focal plane reticle. Really nice glass for the price point. Higher magnification range than the Leupold, Sarah observed, working the bolt and feeling the smooth action. The trigger feels different too. Crisper break, maybe 2.5 pounds. Chuck looked surprised at her accurate assessment. That's exactly right. How did you know that just from dry firing? Experience, Sarah replied simply. You develop a feel for these things after handling enough rifles. What's the barrel length on this one? 24 inches. Heavy barrel profile for better heat dissipation during extended shooting sessions. General Morrison stepped closer to examine both rifles. Miss Martinez, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of shooting do you primarily do? Competition, hunting, or just recreational target shooting? Sarah set down the Bergara and met his gaze. All three, actually. I started with hunting alongside my father, moved into competitive precision shooting about 4 years ago, and I still enjoy recreational long-range shooting when I can get to an appropriate range. Competitive shooting, the general mused. What organization? NRA, PRS, something else? Precision rifle series mostly, some local NRA matches. I've been working my way up through the regional competitions, hoping to qualify for nationals next year. Chuck's mouth fell open slightly. The PRS was serious competition, not something weekend hobbyists typically participated in. These were events where shooters regularly engaged targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards under time pressure and challenging conditions. PRS competition. General Morrison nodded with obvious respect. That's serious shooting. What's your current ranking? Regional top 10, national top 50? Not elite level yet, but I'm improving every season. Sarah spoke matter-of-factly without false modesty or bragging. The younger employee, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. Ma'am, I have to ask, what got you into precision shooting? That's not exactly a common hobby. Sarah smiled, appreciating the genuine curiosity in his question. My father was a Marine sniper in Afghanistan. When he came home, shooting became his way of staying calm, focused. He taught me everything he knew about ballistics, wind reading, and mental discipline. After he passed away 3 years ago, continuing with competitive shooting felt like honoring his memory. The shop fell quiet for a moment. Chuck looked genuinely ashamed of his earlier dismissiveness, while General Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. "Your father sounds like he was a good Marine," the general said quietly. "What unit was he with?" 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. Sergeant First Class Martinez, 2 tours in Helmand Province. Pride was evident in Sarah's voice as she spoke about her father. General Morrison straightened slightly. "I knew some good Marines from 2-3. They saw serious action in Helmand. Your father was part of some important operations during a very difficult time." Chuck cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Martinez, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions that were completely wrong, and I'm sorry. That was unprofessional and disrespectful." Sarah studied his face, looking for sincerity. "I appreciate that, Chuck, but I have to ask, would you be apologizing if General Morrison hadn't walked in?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chuck's discomfort was obvious, but to his credit, he answered honestly. "Probably not," he admitted. "And that's something I need to think about. I've probably treated other customers the same way without even realizing it." "That's a fair answer," Sarah replied. "Recognition is the first step toward change." General Morrison picked up the Bergara, examining the scope adjustments and rail system. "This is impressive hardware. What kind of groups are you shooting with your current rifle?" "Depends on conditions, but my current setup will hold 3/4 MOA consistently. On a really good day with perfect conditions, I can get down to half MOA, but that's pushing the limits of both the rifle and my abilities." "And what are you shooting now?" "Custom build on a Savage Action. It's been good to me, but I'm at the point where the equipment is starting to limit my progress more than my skills. That's why I'm looking to upgrade." Chuck had been listening intently, clearly learning more about precision shooting in the past 20 minutes than he'd absorbed in years of selling firearms. "So between these 2 rifles, which one do you think would better suit your needs?" Sarah picked up both rifles again, comparing their feel and features side by side. The Bergara has some advantages: higher magnification scope, more modern stock design, better barrel profile for sustained shooting. But the Remington has that classic action smoothness and proven track record. "What about ammunition costs?" the general asked. "The 6.5 Creedmoor versus traditional 308? Creedmoor is definitely more expensive, but it offers better ballistics at long range. Less wind drift, flatter trajectory. For serious competition work, the performance advantages probably justify the cost." Chuck was taking notes now, clearly recognizing that he was witnessing a masterclass in how knowledgeable customers actually evaluate firearms. This was far removed from his usual sales approach of steering customers toward whatever had the highest margin. "You know," General Morrison said thoughtfully, "I think you might benefit from testing both rifles before making a decision." "Chuck, does your shop have any relationship with local ranges that might allow customers to evaluate firearms before purchase?" Chuck looked uncertain. "We've never really done that before. Most people just buy based on reviews and specifications." "Most people," Sarah repeated, a slight smile playing at her lips. "But not all people, right, Chuck?" Chuck's face flushed as he realized Sarah had just used his own flawed logic against him. "Right, not all people. I'm starting to understand that there's a lot I don't know about my customers." General Morrison pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "Actually, I might be able to help with the testing situation. I'm a member at Precision Valley Range, about 30 minutes north of here. They have facilities out to 1,200 yards, and I know the owner well. Would you be interested in putting both rifles through their paces this weekend?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. That would be incredibly helpful. Most ranges around here only go out to 300 yards, which doesn't really test long-range precision." "Excellent. I'll give Frank a call and set something up." The general paused, looking at Chuck. "Of course, that would require the shop to be willing to let potential customers actually test their products." Chuck nodded eagerly, perhaps too eagerly. "Yes, sir, absolutely. We can work something out, maybe a short-term rental agreement or something." "That's a generous offer," Sarah said, though her tone suggested she was still evaluating Chuck's sincerity. "But I have to ask, is this something you'd offer to all your customers or just the ones who happen to have a general advocating for them?" It was another pointed question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Chuck squirmed uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "I think," General Morrison interjected diplomatically, "that this could be an opportunity for the shop to develop a new service. Customer rifle testing could become a competitive advantage, especially for precision firearms." The younger employee, whose name tag read Mike, stepped forward hesitantly. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. We've lost several customers to the big box stores because they offer better return policies. If we could let people actually test rifles before buying, that might bring them back." Chuck looked thoughtful. "It would require some changes to our insurance and policies, but you might be onto something, Mike." Sarah watched this discussion with interest. What had started as a simple attempt to buy a rifle was turning into a business consultation. "You know, from a customer perspective, the ability to test before buying would definitely influence where I shop. Most serious shooters would rather pay a little more to a shop that stands behind their products with actual performance guarantees." "Speaking of guarantees," General Morrison said, "what happens if a customer buys one of these rifles and it doesn't shoot to their expectations? What's your current return policy?" Chuck looked uncomfortable again. "Well, we have a 30-day return policy, but it's really more for defects than performance issues. If someone just doesn't like how a rifle shoots, that's not really our problem." "Interesting perspective," the general replied. "So if Miss Martinez bought one of these rifles and it shot 2-inch groups instead of the claimed sub-MOA accuracy, you'd consider that her problem?" "Well, no, that would be a defect. I meant more like if she just didn't like the feel of the rifle or something subjective." Sarah picked up the thread. "But how would you determine the difference? If I came back saying the rifle wasn't accurate enough, would you take my word for it or would you want proof?" Chuck hesitated, clearly seeing the trap but not sure how to avoid it. "I guess we'd want to see some evidence. Target results or something? From the same person you initially thought couldn't handle the rifle." Sarah's question was quiet but devastating. Mike whistled softly under his breath. "She's got a point, Chuck. We can't question someone's competence when they're buying and then expect them to prove their competence if there's a problem." General Morrison nodded approvingly. "Consistency in customer treatment is crucial for any business. You can't assume incompetence during the sale and then demand proof of competence for returns." Chuck ran his hand through his hair, looking genuinely troubled. "I never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. Our whole approach has been backwards." "It's not just backwards," Sarah added, "it's discriminatory. You made assumptions about me based on my gender, and those assumptions would have affected every interaction we had, from initial sale through any potential problems." The shop fell silent as the full implications of Sarah's words sank in. This wasn't just about one customer interaction. It was about systemic problems in how the business operated. "Miss Martinez," Chuck said finally, "I think this conversation has been more valuable than any training seminar I've ever attended. You've opened my eyes to some serious problems with how we do business." "That's encouraging to hear," Sarah replied. "But the real test is what you do with this knowledge going forward." General Morrison checked his watch. "Well, if we're going to set up this range session for the weekend, I should probably call Frank before he gets busy with other customers." "Sarah, would Saturday morning work for you?" "Perfect. That gives me time to gather my shooting kit and prepare properly." Chuck looked uncertain. "Should I bring both rifles out to the range? I'm not sure about the liability issues with transporting firearms for customers." "Standard procedure would be for you to accompany the rifles," General Morrison explained. "Many shops do it for high-end sales. It also gives you a chance to see your products in action, which could be valuable for future customers." Mike stepped forward. "I'd love to come along if that's okay. I've never seen real precision shooting, and it might help me better serve customers who know more than I do." Sarah smiled at his honesty. "I think that's a great attitude, Mike. The more you understand about what serious shooters actually do, the better you can help them." "It's settled then," General Morrison announced. "Saturday morning at Precision Valley. This should be educational for everyone involved." As they began discussing specific arrangements for the range session, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically the situation had changed. What had started as a frustrating encounter with prejudice and assumptions had evolved into something potentially transformative for both her and the shop. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect conditions for precision shooting. Sarah arrived at Precision Valley Range 30 minutes early. Her shooting bag packed with everything she'd need: custom ammunition, shooting mat, bipod, wind meter, and her father's old spotting. scope that had served her faithfully through countless competitions. The range was impressive. Multiple shooting positions extending from 100 yards out to 1,200, with steel targets at various distances and terrain features that created realistic shooting challenges. She was checking wind conditions when General Morrison's truck pulled up, followed closely by Chuck's shop van. "Beautiful morning for shooting," the general called out as he approached. "Frank's already set up targets at 600 and 800 yards for us. He's curious to see how both rifles perform." Chuck and Mike climbed out of the van, both looking slightly nervous. Chuck carried both rifles in hard cases, while Mike handled the ammunition and shooting accessories they'd brought from the shop. Frank Martinez, no relation to Sarah, as they discovered when making arrangements, emerged from the range office. A former Army Ranger in his 50s, Frank had built Precision Valley into one of the premier long-range facilities in the region. "So you're the young lady who's been making waves in PRS competition," Frank said, shaking Sarah's hand. "General Morrison tells me you're looking to upgrade your equipment." "That's right. These gentlemen from Henderson's gun shop have been kind enough to let me test their rifles before making a decision." Frank glanced at Chuck with surprise. "Test before purchase? That's progressive thinking for a gun shop. Most places just want to move inventory." Chuck looked embarrassed. "Actually, it was Miss Martinez who convinced us we needed to change our approach to customer service." "Smart woman," Frank nodded approvingly. "The shooting sports need more retailers who understand their customers. What rifles are we testing today?" Sarah opened the cases and displayed both rifles, Remington 700 with loopholed glass and Bergara HMR with vortex optics, both in precision configurations. Frank examined both rifles with the practiced eye of someone who'd handled thousands of firearms. Nice setups. The Bergara's been getting excellent reviews in the competition world. The Remington's a classic platform with proven performance. Should be an interesting comparison. They moved to the 600-yard firing line where Frank had already set up steel targets and spotting scopes. Sarah unpacked her shooting mat and began preparing her equipment with methodical precision. "First things first," she announced. "I need to verify 0 on both rifles. These scopes may have been zeroed at shorter distances, and I want to confirm their settings before we start serious accuracy testing." Chuck watched as Sarah set up the Remington first, adjusting the bipod legs and checking the scope settings. Her movements were economical and confident, showing the muscle memory of countless hours on firing lines. "What distance were these rifles zeroed at the factory?" she asked. "The paperwork says 100 yards, Chuck replied, consulting the documentation that came with each rifle. "That's what I expected. Most factory zeros are set for 100 yards, but serious precision work requires verification at longer ranges." Sarah chambered around and settled behind the rifle. "I'm going to fire a 3-shot group at 600 yards to check point of impact." The first shot rang out, the sound echoing across the valley. Through the spotting scope, Frank called out the impact location. "High and right, about 8 inches from center." Sarah made scope adjustments and fired again. "Better. About 4 inches high, 2 right." "Third shot," she murmured, settling back into position. The rifle cracked again and Frank whistled softly. "That one's maybe 2 inches from center. Nice shooting. The rifle's grouping well, just needs the scope adjusted for this distance." Mike leaned forward, fascinated. "So the rifle is accurate, but the scope settings were wrong for this range?" "Exactly," Sarah explained while making final adjustments to the scope. "A 100-yard zero puts you several inches high at 600 yards due to bullet trajectory. For precision work, you need to know exactly where your rifle shoots at every distance you plan to use." She repeated the process with the Bergara, finding that it also needed scope adjustments but grouped equally well once properly zeroed. Both rifles were performing as advertised. "Now for the real test," Sarah announced, loading carefully weighed rounds into both rifles. "I'm going to shoot 5-shot groups with each rifle at 600 yards, then move to 800 for another set. That should give us a good comparison of their accuracy potential." General Morrison checked his watch. "Take your time. Precision can't be rushed." The next hour was a masterclass in long-range shooting technique. Sarah's approach was methodical and deliberate, checking wind conditions between each shot, monitoring her breathing, and maintaining consistent form. Chuck and Mike watched in fascination as she demonstrated skills they'd never witnessed firsthand. The Remington's first group measured just over 3/4 of an inch, while the Bergara managed a 5-shot group of just under half an inch. Both were exceptional results, but the Bergara showed slightly better consistency. Impressive shooting with both rifles, Frank observed. But I can see a small difference in how they're performing. At 800 yards, the differences became more pronounced. The Bergara's superior ballistics and higher magnification scope allowed Sarah to place shots with slightly more precision, though both rifles remained well within competitive standards. From a pure accuracy standpoint, Sarah said, examining the targets through binoculars, the Bergara has a slight edge. The 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge is just more forgiving at long range, and the higher magnification scope helps with precise target acquisition. Chuck had been taking notes throughout the session, clearly impressed by what he was witnessing. Miss Martinez, I have to ask, would you have performed this well with any rifle, or do the equipment differences really matter? It was a perceptive question that showed Chuck was beginning to understand the relationship between equipment and performance in precision shooting. Both matter, Sarah replied. A skilled shooter can make a mediocre rifle perform better than its specifications suggest, but there are limits. At the highest levels of competition, equipment differences can mean the difference between winning and losing. General Morrison nodded thoughtfully. It's like any precision instrument. A master carpenter can do excellent work with basic tools, but give him premium tools and his work becomes even better. Exactly. And in competition, where everyone is highly skilled, small equipment advantages become more significant. As they packed up the equipment after the successful range session, Chuck approached Sarah with obvious hesitation. Miss Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Sarah looked up from cleaning the Bergara's barrel. What's on your mind? After everything that happened this week, the way I treated you initially, this eye-opening range session, everything you've taught me about precision shooting, I'm wondering if you'd consider doing some consulting work for our shop. The request caught Sarah off guard. What kind of consulting? Help us redesign our approach to serving serious shooters. Train our staff on precision firearms. Maybe even do some customer education seminars. Chuck's words came out in a rush, as if he was afraid she'd reject the idea before he could fully explain it. General Morrison paused in his packing, clearly interested in Sarah's response. That's an interesting proposition, Sarah said carefully. But I have to ask, what makes you think your customers would trust my expertise? A week ago, you didn't think I was qualified to buy a rifle, let alone teach others about precision shooting. Chuck winced at the reminder of his initial prejudice. Because I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. And if I could be that wrong about someone with your qualifications, I'm probably wrong about a lot of other things too. Mike nodded enthusiastically. Miss Martinez, watching you shoot today was incredible. I learned more about precision rifles in 4 hours than I have in 2 years of working at the shop. Our customers deserve to work with people who actually understand what they're trying to accomplish. Frank had been listening quietly while organizing his equipment. Sarah, if I may, Chuck's idea has merit. Most gun shops don't really understand the precision shooting community. Having someone with your credentials and competition experience could really set them apart. Sarah considered the proposal while finishing her equipment cleanup. The idea of helping educate both customers and shop employees was appealing, especially if it meant fewer people would face the kind of dismissive treatment she'd initially received. I might be interested, she said finally, but it would have to be done right. This can't just be a marketing gimmick or a way to make your shop look progressive. If we're going to do this, it needs to create real change in how you serve all your customers, not just the ones who happen to look like competitive shooters. Chuck nodded earnestly. Absolutely. What would you need from us to make this work? Sarah shouldered her rifle case and walked toward the parking area, her mind working through the possibilities. First, every employee needs to understand that you can't judge a customer's expertise by their appearance. That means treating everyone with respect until they prove otherwise, not the reverse. That's fair, Mike agreed. What else? Second, you need to actually know your products. Not just the specifications from the manufacturer's website, but real-world performance data. That means testing rifles, building relationships with local ranges, and staying current with what serious shooters actually need. General Morrison smiled approvingly. Sound business practices that would benefit any retailer, not just gun shops. Third, Sarah continued, you need to be willing to admit when you don't know something. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm not sure, but let me find someone who can help you, instead of making assumptions or giving bad advice. Chuck was taking notes again, clearly committed to the idea. What about the consulting arrangement itself? How would you want to structure it? Sarah paused beside her truck, considering. I'd want to start with staff training. Maybe a half-day session covering precision shooting basics, customer evaluation techniques, and product knowledge. After that, we could do monthly customer seminars on topics like long-range shooting fundamentals, equipment selection, and competition preparation. That sounds perfect, Chuck said eagerly. What would you charge for something like that? We can discuss compensation later, Sarah replied. But I have one non-negotiable condition. What's that? I want to buy the Bergara at your normal retail price, not some special deal because we're talking about a consulting arrangement. This has to be a legitimate business transaction, not a favor or an attempt to buy my endorsement. Chuck looked surprised. You don't want any kind of discount or professional accommodation? Absolutely not. If I'm going to recommend your shop to other serious shooters, it needs to be because you provide good products and service at fair prices, not because you gave me special treatment. General Morrison extended his hand to Sarah. Miss Martinez, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Your father would be proud of the way you've handled this entire situation. Sarah shook his hand warmly. Thank you, General. And thank you for stepping in when you did. I'm not sure how differently things might have gone without your intervention. Sometimes people just need a reminder to live up to their better angels, the General replied. Chuck and Mike seem like good people who were operating with bad assumptions. The fact that they're willing to acknowledge their mistakes and make changes speaks well of their character. Frank began loading the target stands into his truck. Sarah, I hope you'll consider using Precision Valley for any customer training you do with the shop. It would be good for business, and I'd enjoy watching more people discover what precision shooting is really about. I think that could work perfectly, Sarah agreed. Having access to long-range facilities would definitely enhance any training program. As they prepared to leave, Chuck approached Sarah one more time. Miss Martinez, I know I can't undo the way I treated you when you first came into the shop, but I want you to know that this experience has been genuinely transformative for me. I'm going to be a better business owner and a better person because of what happened this week. Sarah studied his face, looking for sincerity. Chuck, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after you recognize them. If you're truly committed to changing how your shop operates, then something good will have come from a frustrating situation. I am committed, Chuck replied firmly, and I'm going to make sure Mike and any future employees understand that every customer deserves respect and knowledgeable service, regardless of what they look like or what assumptions we might be tempted to make. As Sarah drove home with her new Bergara rifle secured in the back of her truck, she reflected on the unexpected turns the week had taken. What had started as a simple attempt to upgrade her competition equipment had evolved into an opportunity to potentially influence how an entire business approached customer service. More importantly, she'd proven something to herself that her father had always insisted was true, that competence and character would ultimately be recognized and respected, even when they came in forms that challenged people's preconceptions. The young woman who had walked into Henderson's gun shop facing dismissive prejudice was driving home as a respected consultant who would help ensure other customers never faced the same treatment. 3 months later, Henderson's gun shop had become known throughout the region as the place serious precision shooters went for knowledgeable service and honest advice. Sarah's monthly seminars drew participants from neighboring states, and Chuck's willingness to admit his past mistakes and demonstrate genuine change had earned him respect in the shooting community he'd never enjoyed before. The transformation proved that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from dramatic confrontations, but from honest conversations between people willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to doing better. And sometimes the person who walks into your business knowing exactly what they need might also be exactly the person who can help you discover what your business really needs.